Welcome to the Bold SLP podcast. We are so happy that you're here and can't wait to share with you all of the amazing conversations we've been having.
We are the co-founders of the Bold SLP Collective, and we are also your hosts, Lisa, Desi, and myself, Ingrid. Each of us has a variety of experiences in all things bilingual and bimodal speech-language pathology. You'll get to know us pretty well on here.
We started this podcast to share our lived experiences, but also because we want to bring advocacy and cultural humility to the forefront of every speech therapy conversation. We hope that you'll join us each week, and we hope that you enjoy this episode.
We are here with Desi, and I will be your host today, Ingrid. We are on to episode 4 of season 1 of our podcast. This episode I am so excited to share with you. It is titled Collectively Talking About Desi. We will get to know Desi all the way from the beginning, and I can't wait for you to hear her story. Desi, how's it going?
I'm good. How are you, Ingrid?
Doing good. Just enjoying the last bit of summer and beginnings of fall over here in the Southwest.
Yeah. Well, here in the Northeast, it's definitely fall, so totally different.
I know you are in a totally different time zone.
Yeah. Actually, the leaves here have already completely changed. So, in my experience, usually well before the end of October, all the leaves have fallen onto the ground. So, just waiting for that to come around.
Well, I can't wait to hear your story, Desi. I feel like it'll just really bring home a lot of the things that I love about you. So, I'm so excited for this today.
Oh, thanks, Ingrid. Yeah. So I guess I'll start with just growing up. So I was actually born in Elizabeth, New Jersey. I grew up there, and it's a place that sometimes I think that it hasn't really left an imprint on me, but then other times I realize it really has. So I was born in Elizabeth to Cuban parents. My mom came to the U.S. when she was 14 with my grandparents. And my dad arrived in the U.S. when he was in his 20s through the Mariel boat lift that happened out of Cuba. So, yeah, they met in Miami, but we ended up living in New Jersey for the beginning of my life. And I have a brother who is 2 years younger than me. I guess the first thing to know about me, especially growing up in New Jersey, was I was very close with my grandparents. My grandmother stopped working around the time that my brother was born, and she took care of us until I started going to preschool. And so because of that, and because my parents only spoke to me in Spanish, my first language was Spanish, and I didn't speak English until I got to school. So I was a sequential language learner. Yeah. And so it's just interesting. I remember my grandmother mentioning to me, when I was younger, that I did mostly fine, not knowing English and getting, put into like a preschool setting, but that there were definitely some moments where other kids would try to, I guess, push me around. And I would tell my grandmother, but I didn't know how to address it. So I just let it slide. It's, it's one of those things that I have no memory of that, but I think for her, it was just kind of tough to imagine me having to navigate a whole new setting by myself. Right. And interestingly enough, I think that, I don't know it. I'm a very social person now, but when I was younger, especially elementary through high school, I was very painfully shy. Which I think people who know me now think that that's crazy when I say that. I am pretty talkative and open about things, but I think it maybe the fact that I learned the languages sequentially, or that I wasn't completely comfortable speaking in English, especially when I was really young. I don't know if that played a role.
But I can see you being more selective, if that makes sense.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, and I think
not with everybody, you would be your full self.
Yes. And actually, I mean, I think in all honesty, the way I see myself is more of like an introverted extrovert. Like I really love being around people, but I'm just not the person in the middle of the room capturing everyone's attention.
Right.
But I do like to mingle. So there you go. So but yeah, so I grew up in Elizabeth. You know, I went to schools with a lot of children from like diverse backgrounds. I'd say that the schools that I went to were just like a mix of like kids from all different races, all different ethnicities. And so that kind of shaped my experience growing up quite a bit. Um, and then when I was 13, we ended up moving to Miami, Florida, which is much more homogenous. Like I ended up moving to kind of like Southwest Miami, Florida. So in other words, like one of the most Cuban places on the face of the earth. And so going back, you know, going to see my family, going to Miami, was really kind of a shock for me in a lot of ways culturally. Like it really felt like I was like in Cuba sometimes, you know, depending on where you were or the interactions that you had. And so it just took some adjusting for me when I first got there. And it really made me reflect a lot more on like, okay, well, what's my identity here and now in this space? You know, it really wasn't, it changed my whole entire focus as to who I was, or, you know, trying to understand who I was. And especially in those high school years, which are already pretty challenging. And I was one of these weird people who graduated at 17 just because I was already like they let me start kindergarten early because my birthday was so close to the cutoff. So
Right.
um so yeah, so I lived in Miami for my 4 years of high school. It was a really fascinating place to be, especially as a teenage girl. When I got there, like all the other teenage girls would like do their nails, and you know, they all wanted like Louis Vuitton belts and sandals and purses, and they like were ironing their hair and stuff, and I was just like, whoa, I don't know what any of this is. And so I, sometimes I try to catch up, and other times I'm like, wait, this is just not who I am. And so my biggest thing I think that defined me in that age was the fact that I was in the newspaper, like the editorial team for the newspaper. So that really shaped me. I obviously like spent a lot of time writing for the newspaper, but we also did a lot of page design. And one of the best things about it was we actually took an annual trip to New York City to go to Columbia University for a journalism conference. And so getting to go there and like see beyond kind of the confines of Miami, or, you know, kind of, I think almost in a way, like kind of seeing beyond what expectations I had for myself, or my family had for me. It was just really eye-opening. And it was just kind of like the little bit of a taste of freedom that really helped me kind of take off and figure out where I wanted to go in life. It wasn't
Yeah, I'm
really
over here
straightforward.
nodding my head like you can see me.
Yeah.
But yes, that word expectations has come up on my episode and on Lisa's episode, and here it is again.
Yeah. Yeah. So I guess before I kind of explain, you know, where I went after high school, I think it's important to note, like I said, my mom emigrated to the US with my grandparents. That was actually 50 years ago. I can't believe it. In 1971. And so they had a very traditional household, you know. It was my mom and my aunt. And my mom was 7 years older than my aunt. So she was kind of like the one who took care of her. And my grandparents worked all the time, especially when they arrived in the US. And so there were just certain things that you didn't challenge. Or if you did challenge them, there was a lot of pushback, just expectations around what children are supposed to do, what especially daughters, what daughters are supposed to do.
Mhm.
Mom and my aunt kind of raised me to be a little bit of a rebel, even though I don't know that they would think of it that way. So like I'm saying, like this, it was kind of like a perfect storm, like that little bit of inspiration from them. And then taking a trip like this one where I could see a little bit more of the world. It, you know, those things started to define me a little bit more. And so what happened after high school was that I ended up going to the University of Florida. And that was a big drawn out battle with my family because the University of Florida is 6 hours away from Miami. And nobody had ever left the family to ever go to college. You know, my mom did night school and eventually graduated with her degree. My aunt did go to college, but it was, you know, right next to home. So I was the first person in my entire family to have that experience of going away. And it was a really big full family battle for me to convince them to let me leave. And you know, I knew that I needed it. But it's so funny because now looking back, I don't know, you know, you just always think about the ways that things could have played out differently. So yeah, so anyway, things didn't play out differently. I did go to UF, and I was an English and Spanish major. I majored in English. I always loved literature. And so I knew from graduating high school that I would be an English major. And the Spanish part really creeped up on me. So I think this is the other component of my life experience that I think is important to share on this podcast.
Yes.
So big secret reveal time. I went through significant language attrition in Spanish the older I got. By the time that I was in high school, I really didn't want to speak Spanish at all. So my grandmother would say, you know, do you want to eat now? Do you want to eat later? You know, you have all these like home conversations, which are really basic language conversations. And, you know, or I try to explain something to her about my day and I would say something wrong or the verb would be wrong. And she'd be like, you know, you don't say it that way. You say it this way. And so anyway, it got to the point where between that, like not being able to effectively communicate and then having some Spanish courses in high school that were like less than, what's the word I'm looking for? Just less than inviting, you know, or accepting that I had this negative perception of Spanish. Like I really think that we could do so much more healing with people that are, you know, second generation speakers. But it just felt like a very judgmental space.
Right.
So I just wanted to get through it and be done. And it was just, my Spanish teacher was so upset with me. My Spanish 2 teacher, it was a Spanish 2 for heritage speakers, which they offered at the high school that I was at. She was so upset with me at the end of Spanish 2 that she pulled me aside and said, like, no, you have to continue taking Spanish. And I said, no, I'm done. Like, I'm not doing this anymore. I'm like, why would I do this? Like, you know, I had like a perfect A in the course, but she would always give me like a C for behavior because it was apparent that it was hard for her to reach me. Like I didn't feel seen by the way that the course was designed. So anyway, yeah. And so I went to college. I started taking English classes. I started taking other classes that I was interested in, just other languages. I tried taking Italian. That was really hard to get into. It was a very popular course. I took French. I took Latin. And then eventually I was like, you know what? I was like, I do speak another language, even if it's not perfect. I should try to improve in that language. So I did a placement test. And I was also fortunate that at UF, they offered a heritage language program for people like me, people who spoke Spanish at home.
Mm-hmm.
So I started taking courses and then I found out about a study abroad program in Spain. And I ended up going on that study abroad program a million summers ago now. And then I decided once I returned that I was only like 3 courses away from a major. So I finished up the major. And then by the time that all happened, it was my senior year, and I had my head in a million different places. I had applied to do Teach for America. I thought at one point that I was going to go to law school. I was pretty misguided. Like, I didn't know where to go. And ironically enough, my aunt had always mentioned to me, like, hey, you know, maybe you should think about doing like audiology or speech pathology. And, you know, she had mentioned that to me a few times during the course of my college career. And so I tried to get into like the 101 courses, like the intro courses, and they were always full. And so I was just like, well, whatever, it's fine. I'm not that interested in that. So yes, so it's now I've taken you up to summer 2007.
Yes.
Still wasn't sure what I was trying to do. I did some random odd jobs that summer, and it just so happened that a friend of mine had shared with me that she was applying for a program to teach English in Spain. And I was like, oh, hey, I could do that. And so I got all the information, I applied, and I was accepted. And so in August or September, I moved to Spain. I got all my stuff. I went over there, and at first it was pretty terrible in a lot of ways. Like, I was just so alone, and I had never been that alone. And it was really hard to find an apartment. I think people just didn't want non-Spaniards, which is definitely a thing over there sometimes. And so my first roommate situation was not great. And oh man, so many cultural misunderstandings there, even though you would think, right, like similar cultures. No. So thankfully I got in touch with someone else who was leaving Madrid. That's where I was living. I was living in Madrid, and I got connected to this awesome apartment with everyone was from different countries almost. There were like it was a 14-person apartment. So it was very much like, I don't know. It felt very European, I guess. It felt like a dormitory of kinds. So yeah, we were from all these different countries, and so I closest with my Italian roommate and my Greek roommate. And so I did a lot of traveling. I spent my first year there, and then I decided to spend the second year. And so I was mostly in elementary and high school settings for those 2 years. And I was always constantly thinking, like, okay, well, I need to figure out how I'm going to get back to the US. What am I going to do in the US? And I had one of the thoughts that had entered my mind was to do graduate work. And it's terrible when you have like this vague, idea of, oh, I'll go to graduate school. Like, as if it's like, like a place where everyone's just hanging out, So my issue was that I wasn't, I didn't have a lot of focus. I didn't have a lot of understanding, as you can see. You're 22, you don't really know what you're doing. No offense to the 22-year-olds out there. I'm sure many of you are very prepared, but I was
know what
not.
I was doing at 22.
Exactly. Right. That makes you feel better. So I think that I had a professor in the Spanish department at that time who I had grown close to. And so she saw my back and forth situation with the different options I had considered during my senior year. And she said, listen, she's like, why don't you just go to graduate school and do Spanish, Spanish and Latin American literature. She's like, it'll be great for you. It'll even if you don't decide to do a PhD, like, the worst that you'll have is like a graduate degree. I'm like, oh, okay, sure. So
going along that path, and I ended up getting accepted to the University of Virginia. And that's where I ended up after my 2 years in Spain.
I didn't realize you had been in Spain that long.
Yeah.
I thought like just one semester abroad, but you're abroad and then 2 years of actually working there.
I did. Yep. Yeah. I mean, and it's just, it was really awesome in a lot of ways. I wish I could do that all over again, but like somewhere else. Like I would love to go to Peru and do that, but yeah, it was honestly one of the best things I could have done because I got to travel a lot. Airplane tickets in Europe are just way more affordable. And so
or you take a train and
exactly. Yeah. So I got around a lot. I went, I think, I don't know how many countries I went to while I lived there, but that living there and, kind of having all those opportunities for travel throughout my life, I've been to 25 countries, which is pretty awesome. I feel spoiled. But
that is awesome.
Yeah. So it's been, I mean, it was definitely the most rewarding thing I think I've done. One of those like big life milestones that I'm never gonna regret. Returning to the US, I was like, oh my gosh, this was a mistake. I should have stayed in Europe. So aside from having lived in like Elizabeth and Miami, both of which are like pretty urban areas, even though I lived within the suburbs in each of those places, you had access to cities. And the same way with Madrid. Madrid is a big city. So moving to Virginia was like the first time that I was like, wow, this is rural. Holy moly. Like,
so you're in Virginia now.
Right. And I graduate with my master's degree. And at that point, I had started dating my husband and I knew that I wanted to stay in the area. So after graduating with my master's degree, I taught at a high school that was about an hour away. And it was in kind of the very southern, it was very southern in many ways. So Confederate flags, big trucks, boots, things that I just was not ever exposed to in my life before. And it made for a really interesting and eye-opening experience. Working and teaching young minds who just had very different life experiences than mine completely. So, and there were definitely a lot of moments of learning and, just self-reckoning and helping others along their journey to, recognize their own biases. I was also the English as a second language teacher for 1 year of that teaching job. And so it really put me in a position to be a face to the leadership and the counselors in the school. And at the same time, kind of started me down the path of advocacy for students who were, minoritized within their larger scheme of things.
Right.
So after teaching there, I realized, teaching, I liked it, but it wasn't going to sustain me over a long period of time. I really wanted to figure out, what my next step was. And I knew in my heart of hearts that it was in speech. So I knew that I wanted to do speech pathology because I really enjoyed working with students one-on-one. Sometimes the pace of the classroom can just get away from you. The expectations that are placed on teachers are just unrealistic. And I taught a subject that nobody knew, Spanish, and but it still made for just some challenging situations. I just felt like there had to be something different where I could use the same skill set, but just in a different way, in a more what I felt to be more of a reasonable pace for me. So after teaching for 3 years, I decided to pursue part-time work and do my post-baccalaureate, and I also did that through the University of Florida. Go Gators. So I did that online. I caught up on my prerequisites, and by that point, my husband and I had already moved to Georgia. where he was working at Emory University just temporarily. And so I started applying to different programs, and it was pretty funny. I applied to like an odd smattering of programs because I was applying to universities where my husband had been applying for jobs. So I think I applied to was it Syracuse maybe in New York, and a California school. I think it was CSU Los Angeles. Just a bunch of different places. I eventually ended up getting into UGA, and that's where I ended up going. So the neat thing about my program was that I had the option to do a thesis, which I did. I'm currently still attempting to get it published into a journal. That is a very long-term project now, as I'm finding out, because it's been a long time. It's
Oh my gosh.
yeah, it's been 3 years. And yeah, so after before I graduated from my program, my first year of my graduate program, my husband was still on the job market. Shout out to anybody who is in a PhD program and is trying to find work. In our field of communication sciences and disorders, people tend to find PhD level work, like, either through some sort of like postdoctorate fellowship or, some tenure track position. My husband's profession is not like that. There were so few jobs that, it was one of those things that we really worried over time, if he would find a tenure track position. So he did, and it was at the University of Maine. And I did not expect to ever live here, but it's grown on us. And, in a lot of ways, I think this, I look forward to seeing how the state is going to grow over time and change. It's just a place in flux, I feel. So yeah, that's
I feel
where
like we
I've
need a
been.
map of all the places that you've lived.
Yeah, well, I just say I'm from the East Coast. It's worked out easier that way.
Because I feel like I moved a lot, but I moved back and forth to the same places.
Right. Well, and I think that's what's kind of funny about me. Like, I can never see myself living on the West Coast. And that's no offense to the West Coast. I've been there. I love it. I think it's great. But again, I think I'm always thinking about trying to get back to my family, and they still live in Miami, so I try to stay somewhat close.
I feel the same about living anywhere further east than El Paso, so no offense.
Exactly.
So
Yeah.
Desi, how did you then get started with everything SLP that you've got going on? Because you've got school contracts, your private practice. How did it all come about for you?
So it's really an interesting question. So I'm still trying to figure out how it came about for me. So my CF year, I was here in Maine. I worked for a private practice that did a lot of school contracts. And so I just felt like I was always working. This is a state where there are just distances between people, so the job for my CF year was a lot of driving. So I drove a lot. I had to fill my schedule. That kind of pressure is just something that I was not really excited about. I was definitely way older than your traditional SLP graduate. I graduated when I was 32, I think. So I was just kind of not interested in that kind of lifestyle. But I did my CF for the experience that I got there. And then I actually went on maternity leave because I had my son at the end of my CF year. So I got my C's, and then like a month later I went on maternity leave.
I thought I played fast and loose with that because I had my daughter after my first year with my C's.
Oh no, I brought it close to the vest. Like, yeah, like, oh no, actually, I lied. So I remember that I got my letter with my C's on April 11th, and I remember that because that's my grandmother's birthday. And then I had my son April 26th. So
You did have your
yes.
C's before he was born.
Yes, but barely.
But you were pregnant your
Um
whole CF year, pretty much.
yes,
Oh
yes.
gosh, Des.
Which I do not recommend
No,
if
do
you're
not
driving
recommend.
around. I mean, I especially here, like, oh man, I slipped on the ice a few times.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, it's just
You're really not
again,
making it sound inviting over there.
well, I mean, I'm not trying to make it sound, I think that it just, so many things about the work that you can do here will depend on, I think for me, what I realized is that living here, I needed a job that would offer me flexibility, um, because I didn't want to have these like slip and falls, and I
Right.
wanted to be able to command my time a little bit better. So my CF year, and I think that a lot of people might feel this way. It just felt like I could never catch up,
Oh
and I
yeah.
hated that feeling. After teaching, I felt like I had almost made a commitment to myself. I wasn't going to feel that way any longer, or that I couldn't be that, that I
Right.
didn't want
You
to
were
I
coming
didn't
in
want to
with that
feel
experience.
irresponsible. You know what I mean? Like, you kind of map things onto yourself when it's like not you.
Right.
Yeah. So
Well, when
so
you're a CF, everything takes you longer to do, is what I tell my CFs. Like, don't feel like this is going to be forever.
yeah, and
Like,
that's so
your first
awesome.
report will take you longer, and that is okay. And it'll be easier as you go.
Right, right. And I think that's, yeah, see, that's so awesome. Like, I've never had an opportunity to mentor a student, at least not an SLP student. And so I feel like that's just an awesome experience. Like, I don't I feel like, again, I've mentioned this to you before at some point, but here in Maine, again, the people and the resources are kind of spread out. So after going on maternity leave, I had some time to think about, what I wanted to do. And I'm one of those people who I loved both sides of things, like adults and kids. And so I applied to a job in home health, and I got it. Um, and what I ended up doing was transitioning to home health on a part-time basis. And then the other thing that I did that year after I got my C's, was doing the leadership education and neurodevelopmental disabilities program, aka LEND, through the University of New Hampshire and the University of Maine. So it's an interdisciplinary program. It brings together like professionals and family members of people with disabilities. And so it was something that I had like a weekly commitment to, and it had a stipend. So anyway, it was perfect for me at that point in time. And it was great because I got to learn a lot more about just things that we don't really review very well in grad school, or I feel like we didn't spend much time on it at all, but like social determinants of health, um
Yeah,
the
definitely
different
not.
models of disability. Yes. Yep. And so I felt like it kind of like completed me in a lot of ways professionally. And so I've been affiliated with them ever since. And I'm fortunate that this is my second year now as a faculty member for them. So I mentor a student each year um,
Way to
through that
bury the
program.
lead, Desi.
Well, so, all right. So
If you
then let
guys
me
can't
see.
tell, Desi is the humble side of the equation of our tagline.
Oh my gosh.
Lisa and I
What,
bring the bold and loud, and
well,
Desi is so
really,
humble.
I don't know if it's humble, but I definitely take on too many projects sometimes. But I do love the projects, and I love dividing up my time into different things that give me positive energy. So anyway, I
Yeah.
think that's going back to that question about private practice. That's how this all led to this point, where I realized that by working for somebody else, I felt like I was leaving money on the table. I knew that I could contract as well. And at the same time, I knew that the work setting that I had maybe had in mind when I graduated, like some sort of like multidisciplinary clinic with bilingual speech pathologists, even one, bilingual speech pathologist who spoke different languages, or, access to interpreters, like that all just kind of dried up when I found
that's
out
like
that I was.
some dream scenario that I don't know that it exists.
Well, I mean, maybe it doesn't, and maybe that's kind of the problem. I had to kind of built it up in my head that way. But then you move to a rural state, and the equation changes again. So,
Right.
so I decided to build something up that I could shape into my own. And so I had a friend who used to call it a big, hairy, aggressive goal. I think it was a BHAG. My aggressive goal is that one day I would like to be the person who does school age evaluations for children who speak other languages, and I would contract with school districts across the state. So
that's
right
an awesome
now
goal.
we're doing poco a poco. I mean, I'm just moving slowly through it, but yeah, that is so far, a pretty good summary of me from childhood till now.
That's amazing. I did not know that you had not been in Miami this whole time. Like, I kind of knew you were born in New Jersey, but I assumed that you grew up in Miami.
No, it's so hard because people ask me all the time, like, where are you from? And it's easier for me to say Miami because my family still lives there.
Right.
And
yeah,
and
like me, I just say Texas when I don't feel like going through my life story.
Exactly. Yeah. And but it's been really interesting lately. I'm starting to recognize my upbringing in New Jersey really shaped me in a lot of ways. I like I said,
birth to 13.
Yeah, I had, access to different cultures and, people of different backgrounds. And it's pretty funny. Here in Maine, I have a group of friends, and before COVID, we would do weekly trivia and stuff like that. And we recognize that like all of us were from away, which, it is the wording that they use here to say you're not from here. And so our trivia name was Mainly Immigrants, which is pretty good.
Yeah, mainly immigrants.
Yeah. So, I mean, but it's really crazy. Like, I think, most of the people that I know here are just not from here. So,
Right.
but that's me in a nutshell.
Well, thank you, Desi. I love getting to know more about you.
Thank you for having me. And I look forward to sharing other personal experiences throughout the podcast. Awesome.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening and supporting the Bold SLP Collective. You can find a closed caption version of this podcast on our YouTube channel. We will also have show notes on our website. If you enjoyed this episode, we'd really appreciate it if you do all the podcast things. Follow, subscribe, download, and review. And don't forget, we love hearing from you, so connect with us on Instagram at the Bold SLP Collective. Stay bold and humble. See you next time.